Jacksonville. The child was born who couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts. Poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history, this land of flowers.
The Week That Was from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. We're coming to you on the 23rd of June, 2018. An interesting week of virtually nothing. We have the border skirmish of people coming into the U.S., families being separated, children going to little cages and various other facilities throughout the country. The Army and Navy, etc., on alert. Several bases in Texas and one being prepared in in Arkansas for roughly about 25,000 people. Thus, we did a program earlier on Immigrant Camp USA that it was brought about by the statement by DJ Trump that the U.S. would not turn into an immigrant camp. Well, it's already turned into an immigrant camp because you have to give immigrants some semblance of due process. In other words, if they're arrested at the border, they have to be taken before tribunals, immigration judges, and thus a sentence put down. But in the meantime, if they are parents with minor children, the children are separated and sent off to cages or whatever, romper rooms, you name it, that's where they landed. And that had brought or is bringing a negative publicity on the Trump administration, and by virtue of it, the grand old party itself. Trump's response was to parade some families up, he's done that before, that were victims of violent acts by quote-unquote immigrants, pretty much drunken driving, various other things. But in any population group of hundreds of thousands and millions of people, you will have some that commit crimes. There's no doubt about that. But by spotlighting those people, he's just reinforcing the stereotypes. We'll get to that a little bit here by a massive Pew study that will come up next here in our coverage. Well, no, actually we'll do Uncle Carl Rove. He's talking about suicide, something that touched him personally, and various other people will make some comments on it. He's moved a little bit from what we normally would get from Uncle Carl Rove. But let's do it firstly here, and then we'll go to the massive Pew study. Thousands of people were contacted, and we'll tell you all about it in a second here. This article, My Mother's Suicide Was Preventable. Some suicides, incidentally, are preventable, some are not. some people are under various treatment programs, and he highlights, I didn't know, Spide, or I hope that's how I pronounce his, Anthony Boudin. But saw familiar threads in their suicide, as my mother took her own life at age 51. Sprague had spoken to her family the night before and was looking forward to a trip to California. Something very unusual there, and Boudin was in his favorite country, France, working on a TV show. My mother would struggle through her third and failing marriage, and had arrived at a plan to get back on her feet, and supported by her friends and family. People were shocked when Sprague and Boudin hung themselves, as she was in New York apartment. He was in a hotel room in Strasbourg, France. No one saw it coming when the day after expressing optimism about her future, my mother drove into the desert, connected a hose to her pickup exhaust pipe, and strung it through the cab's back window, and died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Sprague left a note telling her 13-year-old daughter it wasn't her fault. My mother wrote a note explaining pride in her 5 children, telling her grandchildren that she loved them, and absorbing her family from her decision. These final messages want to assure of the irrepressible sense of guilt and shame that the family and friends feel after a suicide. I should have known. If only I had paid attention, I should have done something. Except you aren't responsible. Suicide is a personal, solitary decision a human being can make, whether the accumulation of a long decline or a shock like a thunderbolt on a clear day. Suicide is often driven by depression, anxiety, drug addiction, and other mental disorders, yet is among the most preventable causes of death in the U.S. today. If it can be detected, I remember in school studying that. Emil Durkheim, if you want to look at his classic work, Suicide. Suicide comes about when there is a person enters a stage called enemy hopelessness, that all avenues are closed to the person, and the person feels absolutely hopeless. Or as in Kay Sprague's life, she was just simply tired of life. And that can happen with individuals. It's just one of those things. Now, there are other areas that people are terminally ill or will be terminally ill, various forms of cancers, other diseases that take their lives. But that's a little different situation from these surprise situations. We don't know why the chef hung himself. We suspect with Sprague she had suffered from a depression for a number of years, and we assume was being treated. So that's a little different kind of situation there. Was going to California looking forward to a trip, but all of a sudden I suppose she decided she wouldn't go. And a lot of that depends upon circumstances surrounding the person and what brought about that particular situation. Now, drug overdose are a totally different thing. Uncle Carl does have some confusion here in that many of the people that are quote-unquote being treated, like I don't know about the chef, but evidently Sprague was, that it is out of the blue. But they were aware that she suffered from depression, and which means she had up, I don't know if she had anxiety or not, but her up-down days. Evidently she was in an up cycle, being optimistic. And also people literally give you false statements of their well-being or not of their well-being. They can manufacture things where you assume that everything is correct with them, as our friend in Australia, Dave Jones, would say, everything is hunky-dory. That expression in Australia doesn't go very good here. But nonetheless, it does apply to these victims, I assume. Carl Rove's mother evidently had problems with these various marriages that fell apart. We don't know the situation there. It's difficult to tell if she was selecting the same type of men or the same type of men were selecting her. Very difficult to say there. But you also have cases of people that have been fighting various mental health disorders for years, that have been treated, have not been treated, and leave with suicidals. But one thing to remember, majority of the people that are depressed that even don't get help do not commit suicide. But there are others that some event in their life has just overwhelmed them and they decide to exit. We've been looking at this, the episode of Suicide, since Emil Durkheim, his study of suicide. But people need to understand that in a society, and a lot of that also depends upon the society itself, the types of secular and our religious training that people are subjected to, makes more of an impact on some than on others. But nonetheless, the family is left behind. And families that usually have people that have been depressed, they understand that this could be something that will happen. But families with people that do not appear to be depressed, do not have any type of counseling, etc., it just happens out of the blue. I remember a fellow in university that we saw him in classes, or in a class, I think it was, but very, very long time ago. But this fellow hung himself, or whatever it was, and the people that knew him best in the class, we were not one of those, were very, very surprised that it happened. And he worked for Barack Obama, and I worked for G.W. Bush. Axelrod's father died by suicide when Axelrod was 19. Police came to his dorm room. I remember reading his book also about that. He later wrote a beautiful tribute to his father. Often insights his dad was impacted by the sense so prevalent in our society that depression in somebody is a character flaw rather than an illness. He believed that's what kept his father was a psychologist incidentally, from seeking help along with others. And again, this is societal impact, religious training. I don't know about Axelrod's father and what the situation was. Sprayed talked about continuing sadness. Family members said, my mother wrote her suicide note, but she was very tired, deep inside tired. A study by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention found that many people resort to suicide after problems in relationships. I'm thinking of DJ Trump here. Amidst stress over work, physical health, or finances. Substance abuse is also a major trigger. Some challenges may bring on a depression, or may be underlining depression worse. Well, make online depression worse. The stigma surrounding a mental illness keeps many with depression from seeking treatment, who refuse treatment for any other life-threatening disease. A physician could say, we caught it in time, we can deal with it if you don't need to die from it. Well, yeah, no doubt about that. There are many, many diseases, and we lost Dr. Krautheimer. He was a psychiatrist himself, and he had cancer. I think it was cancer of the stomach, and it returned, and it was in his lower colon. From our personal experience, we know that cancer is one of those situations that appears. Fortunately for us, prostate cancer. Normally, prostate cancer is a very long and slow-moving cancer. Our cancer was a little bit different. It did not metastasize, so a different situation there. Doesn't mean like his, at a later date it could. That is something you deal with from a disease standpoint. Does cancer and these diseases and some of the types of medications they use can bring on depression. I remember talking to a medical man about that, and quite normal. His wife had hormone therapy, they call it, along with other types of chemotherapy for breast cancer, and it did bring on what we call common depression for a while there, but she bounced out of it quite quickly. That's a different situation from what we talked about here. So we commend Uncle Carl for bringing this out. Incidentally, Axelrod was informed about his father's death at his college dormitory, and he went to identify the body, which is a double take there. Uncle Carl's mother died, 51 years old, and I assume he didn't identify the body. Anyway, we'll switch from that to a Pew study, and this is one of those very, very large Pew studies of factual opinion and borderline statements. Below are 12 new statements that respondents were asked to categorize. Factual statements. Healthcare costs per person in the U.S. are the highest in the developed world. Number 2, Barack Obama was born in the U.S. Number 3, immigrants are in the U.S. Illegals have some rights under the, and this is how it's phrased now, under the Constitution. Yes, all people in the U.S. have rights under the Constitution. Barack Obama was born in Hawaii, according to his birth certificate, and no doubt people bring that out. As far as healthcare costs, yes, the U.S. does spend more on healthcare costs than any nation in the world, developed or not. ISIS lost a significant portion of its territory in Iraq and Syria in 2017. That is correct. Spending on Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid make up the largest portion of the U.S. federal budget. Now, those are things that are mandated now. Medicare, you get that out of FICA. Social Security is a fund that you pay into. Medicaid is different. So this question could have been worded differently, but it is a quote-unquote factual statement there. Now, these are opinion statements, and you used to learn this in what we call civics or government courses. They don't teach those anymore. Democracy is the greatest form of government. It's an opinion. Increasing the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour is essential for the health of the U.S. economy. And no doubt about that. Abortion should be legal in most cases. We believe in all cases. Immigrants in the U.S. illegally are a very big problem for the country. Incorrect. The government is always wasteful and inefficient. Well, those are opinion statements, and we'll talk a little bit how they fell. Applying additional scrutiny to Muslim Americans would not reduce terrorism in the U.S. Voter fraud or across the U.S. has undermined the results of our election. There is no proof of that. So we'll go up here. Distinguishing between factual and opinion statements. This is the Pew study, very large study, and digital savvy. I'm not sure what they define that out. Those trusting the news media fared better. Republican Democrats both influenced by political appeal of statements. Well, that's just, what about those of us that are not? This is a very large study. 5,035 people by the Pew people were examined here, and we gave you the questions and the findings from the study conducted between February 22nd and March 8th of this year, revealed the basic test presents a challenge. The main portion of the study, which measured the public's ability to distinguish between 5 factual statements and 5 opinionated statements, found that a majority of Americans correctly identified at least 3 of the 5 statements in each set. But this resulted only in better than random guesses. Far few Americans got all 5 correct. Roughly a quarter got most or all wrong. And that sort of is a precursor to where the American people are. Those with higher political awareness, those with very digital, who are very digitally savvy, those who place a higher level of trust in the news media are better able than others to accurately identify news-related statements as factual or opinion. 36% of Americans with a high level of political awareness, those who are knowledgeable about politics and regularly get political news, correctly identified all factual statements, compared with about half as many, 17%, with low political awareness. A lot of people just simply don't care. The political awareness and digital savvy are related to education in predictable ways. Those relationships persist even when accounting for an individual's educational level. Trust in those areas do. The reporting also matters. Who does the report matters. 4 in 10 Americans have a lot of trust in information from national news media organizations. Now, those are monopoly news media organizations. 39% correctly identified all factual statements, compared with 18% of those who did not. Additionally, political awareness and party ID play a role in these things. Republicans, Democrats, that's all they explored. They didn't explore independence here. Democrats and Republicans were likely to think news statements are factual when they appear to come from where they tend to go. President Obama was born in the U.S. and may be one of the perceived as the most congenital to the public left, less so to the right. 9 in 10 Democrats, 89% correctly identified a factual statement, compared with 63% of the Republicans. DJ Trump was a big one pushing that conspiracy theory along. 4 in 10 Democrats, 37%, incorrectly classified the left appealing a statement increase the federal minimum wage to $15 a night is essential for the health of the economy as factual, compared with about half as many Republicans. Well, again, this is an opinion, a statement, period. And would increasing the federal minimum to $15 an hour is essential for the health of the U.S. economy as a factual. Now, it is an opinion statement. It's not necessarily a factual statement. But however, there have been studies out there, and this is where this falls a little short, that have proven that raising the minimum to $15 an hour in many states were essential. And again, these are time-related. I think in Washington State, one of those states that voted to do this, the $15 an hour doesn't come into 2022. Quite a while out there. But again, this is what sometimes you get. News brand labels in this study have modest impact on separating a factual from opinion. And they list the New York Times here and the right-leaning Fox News, and they put USA Today in the middle. Well, I recall when USA Today started out, it was at the time seen as a tabloid. It was a fast-reading, minute or so headline type news. In other words, it was a summary. We used to be involved in distributing news summaries. Is basically what it to businesses. One of the side businesses we were in at Cranston. And basically that's what we would do, was give a couple of paragraphs, a summary. And at that time, you didn't have the internet as such. Thus, you had to get it from hard copy newspapers. With U.S. Today, the idea was not only present the news, but they had colorful pictures, which put them on par, more or less, with television. The picture is 1,000 words or whatever. Anyway, that was how they started out. Now, they, of course, they own a chain of papers, including the Des Moines Register, which comes to mind here. Fox is Fox. Fox is one of these tabloids on the air that blast us at a sound level higher than should be. The same with CNN. What the accuracy is very hard to say. The New York Times, we can go back to the foreign correspondent Miller that made up, I forget the first name right now, that made up all the stories there, and it did not come out as good as it should have. Democrats were modestly less than Republicans. Let's see. Statements attributed to news outlets. Republicans correctly classified 77% of the time attributed to Fox, 8% higher than Democrats. Well, a lot of people don't listen to Fox. Anyway, USA Today, New York Times was attributed. The label statements news outlet had no impact on Republicans. When Americans call a statement factual, they overwhelmingly also think it's accurate. They tend to disagree with factual statements they incorrectly label as opinion. And well, this is back to the fake news situation here, and you'll see that. And it's a very long study. I'm sort of going through it. Ask respondents to categorize news statements as factual or opinion, and a lot of this would depend on what you had. And these are 12 statements of what I read in coming into this, and you heard this by many people about voter fraud. Well, Americans identified more statements correctly than incorrectly, but sizable portion got it wrong. The new study, we won't get it back into that. Quarter of Americans, 26% correctly identified all 5 of the factual statements. I think we went over this. Let me just move on down to the third page of this. The ability to classify statements as factual or opinion varied wisely based upon political awareness. Well, a lot of the opinion questions come up from Fox News, like voter registration, etc. Overwhelming. I've heard that many years ago. A third correctly identified all factual statements as factual, compared with 17% with low political awareness. A lot of people are engaged, particularly in social media, but depending on how they get their information, if all they're getting is reinforced by, various blogs, outlets that are either right or left, it's an interesting situation. That's why we mix it up here. We have Uncle Carl here. We have old Newt Gingrich in here, and various other sources. And we use the Washington Post. We use various local media example. For example, a majority of those who correctly classified the statement spending on Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid make up a large portion of the U.S. budget as a factual statement, so at 52%, but roughly 4 in 10, 37% thought it was inaccurate. Well, the presidential candidate Bernie Sanders would talk about this and what Social Security is. And this is a little misleading. Entitlement programs. Yes, Medicare, Social Security are entitlement programs, and Medicaid are all under this. These are entitlement programs that are written in. In other words, they have been trying to index Social Security. They've tried to do various things with Medicare. Social Security, those are things that are deducted from your paycheck, period. In most instances, Medicaid is a federal state partnership insurance, basically for people that cannot otherwise afford it. A little differently handled in the Affordable Care Act, but at the same time, it benefits people in terms of health care, paying for health care, and for clinics and various other things. A lot that goes into nursing home care. Louisiana, we covered the situation down there where 30,000 or more people were being evicted from nursing homes. We'll have to follow that up. I hadn't followed it up here. Most Americans often disagree with factual statements they incorrectly think are opinion statements, and that is always a situation there, but it depends on how it is written, and this does go into a detail on how it's written. Let me just move on down. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the methodology here, they talk is based on, we talked about the number 5,000 or more, and who paid for it. The John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, the Ford Foundation, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Open Society Foundation. Support for research is part of the Knight Foundation Trust, the Media and Democracy. This is in Espanol and in English, and it was done by the Knowledge Panel that is from GKF Group that conducted this. And how it was worded, etc. Respondents were asked to categorize each statement into two categories: factual statements, regardless of whether it was accurate or inaccurate, and opinion statements. And again, this goes back to some basic things. We'll leave it at this. Let me just throw one other thing while I'm here. U.S. intelligence report: China has the world's most powerful Navy gun, ready for war by 2025. This is a statement here. Warships mounted with electromagnetic rail guns expected to enter the Chinese arsenal by 2025. Rail guns have long appeared on Russian, Iranian, and U.S. Wish lists as cost-effective weapons. They don't have powder in them. In other words, there's capable of striking 124 miles, I think. Railguns use electromagnetic energy instead of gunpowder to propel rounds, and China is capable of striking a target there at speeds up to 1.6 miles per second. And this is a report a shot fired from D.C. could reach Philadelphia and, I see, well, suppose we had a naval ship there. The rounds used range about $25,000 to $50,000 each at this present time. And, these again are factual and opinion pieces all thrown into one. We thought we'd throw it in since we were talking about these. Let's go to the Washington Post here and headline here: arguments, confusion, second guessing inside Trump's reversal of separating families. This is in the Post, and basically what was happening in a lot of these cities here that the lawyers were in court unprepared. This is government lawyers. They didn't exactly know what to do. Suppose they got extensions, period, and that was about all they could get done. And these various statements from various operators. The U.S. Immigration Custom Enforcement Service currently free family residential centers. We talked about this at the start of the report. At this time, there's no request. Well, anyway, the Navy are called temporary and austere. These are some centers that they have set up. Former naval stations near San Francisco, another facility at Camp Pendleton, that's in Southern California, around San Diego, could accommodate house up to 47,000 people. So they are gearing up. This is the article here: two powerful forces collide at U.S. borders immigration policy meets desperation. Well, the word is out. Some people have decided to go elsewhere. But it plays out in Tijuana, that in Nogales, that's in Arizona, desert to Brownsville in Texas on the Gulf of Mexico. These are all cities involved in this struggle along a 2,000-mile border. The executive order tweets, immigrants infesting America, congressional avoidance, all playing here at Nogales. A bus driver from Guatemala and his 17-year-old son set in 100-degree heat Thursday, hoping to be allowed into the U.S. They were allowed to cross, and we don't know what happened to them. Later in the day, Abel and his son were allowed to cross the border to request political asylum. In a courtroom in El Paso, Texas, 19 handcuffed parents facing charge of illegally entering the country were abruptly removed from the courtroom without being prosecuted. And at the same time, the same thing happened to 17 in McAllen, Texas. That's a Latino town. Federal officials in Tucson and Yuma, Arizona, said no parents were prosecuted for illegally entering the country on Thursday. So I suppose they're just waiting in jail. Carlos Garcia, an immigration attorney who was in McAllen's courtroom when the defendants, all parents, were removed, said the government's response disorganized and confused. A lot of confusion with this so-called zero tolerance program. They can't literally get their act together. Government lawyers trying to reunite parents with their children, rushing into buildings anyway. Their suits soaked. It was evidently raining there. Federal judge in McAllen held a hearing to consider whether he should order federal agents to reunite, with parents given time served for illegals crossing the border. The magistrate there, Peter E. Arsby, said the prolonged separation was not acceptable, but the Trump executive order made it a moot point. So again, this is the situation in McAllen alone, Texas area. 900 children were separated from their parents in that area alone, and she also reviewed a sample case of 39 taken from 38 parents. Of those parents, 29 were still detained as of Thursday. This is an assistant federal public defender. This is back to one of the questions in the Pew study. Do immigrants have rights? Yes, they do. And in Arizona, let's see, separation that includes 450 people. This is from the St. John's, legal director of the Florence Project. Another vigilant at the Virgin of Guadalupe at St. Mark's Catholic Church. That's in El Paso. A statue of the Virgin. Anyway, as in El Paso, 200 Catholics joined in that. So in other words, that's a sort of a roundup of what went on. Totally disorganized and who knows what. And Terry Stanford, he lost. And he said, I lost because I wasn't Trump enough. All Republicans should worry. He wrote this. They say elections have consequences, and if this is so, we should all be concerned about the recent primaries across coastal South Carolina. I know well, I lost. I had been involved in politics for a very long time in my state, South Carolina. Had won in tough times. This one was like no other. The operative question was not about conservative politics that are normally the lifeblood of the Republican primary, but rather on the ballot would more loyally support DJ Trump. This wasn't Trump enough in the age. I wasn't Trump enough in the age of Trump, one of 435 members of the House. This shouldn't matter to anyone living in Fairfax and in Cleveland, but based on what I saw on election night, I think it will. We should be alarmed when dissenting voices are quashed. Trump is not the first executive to want compliance with from a legislative body, but he has taken it to new levels. This is more than a problem; it is a challenge to one of the most basic American tenets. We can agree to disagree. Our founding fathers baked into the cake of our political system. We call it the body politic. It is one of the most vital gifts. The constitutional design tug of war between the branches of government was not for efficiency. It was to prevent too much power ending up in one place. This represents my biggest disagreement with the president and is certainly part of what was at play during my district's primary. I am a conservative, no doubt about that. I have overwhelmingly supported the president on issues he attempted to advance, but because I haven't been 100% supportive and have spoken out on areas where we disagreed, he injected himself into the race to oppose me as he did. This suggests his concern was personal loyalty rather than loyalty, a problem in a system built on compliance to laws and constitution, not a single man. Republican Party is going through an identity crisis. Many of us have talked about this and need to decide who we are. I believe we are meant to be a party of individual freedoms and now a party of individualists. I believe in the building blocks of what will get you there, ranging from limited government, taxation, spending, to open markets and free trade. I have all the merit badges and hard-fought votes to demonstrate my allegiance to those ideas. But voters in the election did not value this as much as they did the fidelity to our President Freudian slip there. In fact, on election night, my opponent proclaimed her victory speech that we are the party of DJ Trump. I could not disagree more strongly. I believe that both parties belong to regular working people who labor to advance their ideas. Given the state of our politics, we need to question who we are and what we stand for. Finally, I'm struck by how little we care for the truth. And this is back to the Pew study. The president attack on me was certainly not true. My opponent took license with the truth in many ways. I'd never seen an opponent, but does this pattern, never seen in an opponent, deserve alarm? I believe so. Trust is the foundation to a reason-based republic. It's why I feel the need to speak up for my values, as I did before the election, and there to prove to be an electoral consequence. I respect the fact that I could be seen as an odd person to offer a sermon on the notion of truth, given the fact that I was living a lie in 2009. Remember that. But this is precisely the point. It was discovered, and there were tremendous personal and professional consequences for me in the wake of that discovery. That's the way it's supposed to work. We have been desensitized to the president's torturous relationship with the truth, actually with the facts, but we don't challenge the inaccurate things that he and others say. There should be consequences to making these things up, but inexplicably, as in our society, we have somehow fallen into a collective amnesia in thinking that it doesn't matter. That's what was on the back of Trump's wife's coat. When higher officers in the land doesn't tell the truth. L'Open Presse. That was the press and their fake news. But that's what we call in political consulting a flippable, and a flippable was at work here. Those themes play a part in my first election loss, but I believe there are implications are far more significant. This is something I'll be contemplating over the weeks and months ahead, and he probably will run for re-election. I hope other Americans will too. This is Mr. Stanford and his opinion piece, Mark Stanford from South Carolina. And he talked about the lie. Let me just refresh you with, hopefully we can. Well, we may not be able to. Anyway, we'll just have to skip it. It was a marital affair, we'll tell you that much. But nonetheless, we have Belgium and Tunisia. Belgium 2 over Tunisia. They're interesting. This is the World Cup from ESPN. And I suppose today we have with South Korea and Mexico coming up, and Germany and Sweden. So actually they are already, that was at 8 a.m. in the morning. That's the schedule today. Then the next up is at 11 is South Korea and Mexico. I imagine Mexico is favored. And Germany and Sweden at 2 o'clock. We'll round it out. Let's get to Friday's scores for those that didn't catch Friday, the 22nd. Brazil 2-0 over Costa Rica. And Nigeria 2-0 over Iceland. Another African country moving forward. And Serbia and Switzerland's 1-2. Switzerland pulled that one out. And we go back. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get these scores usually live here, but will be coming up later today. Tunisia, actually, Belgium's up 3-1 now over Tunisia, and this is what we are getting here. And in the FIFA standings, Belgium is up there in England and Tunisia and Panama in that particular setup. So we'll try to keep you abreast as much as we can in football, soccer as they call it, and get these games up on All About Sports. That's our sports program. We will do some programming on the World Cup as we read more about it. Football, obviously, is not one of our sports, but we had followed it quite a bit in the 90s, and because of the commercialization of it, some we need to talk about it via Fox or what have you, and even some of the BBC coverage we are having problems getting. Now let's go we'll go to college baseball, and this was on Friday. We watched a little bit of the Arkansas and Florida game. Anyway, the other score here was Oregon State 12-2 over Mississippi State. This is in Omaha, Nebraska, I assume. And Arkansas and Florida. Arkansas 6-2. The Gators College World Series double elimination round. Okay. And later today, let's see what we have going here. Well, we'll have to wait to get later today, but we can assure you there are teams queuing up for later today. Well, here we go. The workstation. Later today we have Oregon State and Mississippi State. That will be at 8 tonight on it, so we'll see where it goes. College World Series elimination round there. So one of these teams will eliminate the other team. Backtrack here a bit, and while we are waiting on that screen to come up, we have on Monday morning the Monday morning quarterback, which will be here, and we also have an open source report, and I understand what's going on here is some of the external software we have on this workstation that is coming up. Anyway, nonetheless, the Athletics were in on the south side of Chicago, Oakland 11-2. The Phillies were in Washington at 12-2 over the Nationals, and the D-backs in 13. And we're still trying to get the rest of this up. Okay. The D-backs were in Pittsburgh, 2-1 over the Pirates. The Mariners were in Boston. Red Sox, Fenway Park, 14-10. A slugfest going on there. The Tigers were in Cleveland. Cleveland shut the Tigers out 10-0. The Cubs were in Cincy, and wish they were somewhere else. Quintano was the loser, and the Reds 6-3 in that contest. The Reds were blasting all over the place. The Dodgers were in New York. One of probably a few trips they make to New York, but anyway, nonetheless, Dodgers 5-2 there. Mr. Wood was a winner. Mr. Weaver was a loser, and I'm not sure why we're having a little trouble here. We have the Yankees and sometimes there'll be days like this, but nonetheless, the Yankees and somebody, the Yankees lost, I can tell you that. C.C. Sabathia was the loser. Well, we'll leave it at this. Editing will take care of this.